Thank you so much for joining us today, Dinuka.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so thrilled for you. The Torrent, not only was it named one of 2022's most anticipated books, it's just making waves. Oh, pardon the pun. Everywhere. It's incredible. And I just so many questions I need to ask you, but let's start with, for those readers who haven't got their hands on a copy yet, and they absolutely should, so good. What is it about?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's actually been quite overwhelming this sort of release week. So, yeah. So what The Torrent is about. So The Torrent is basically a police procedural. It's crime fiction police procedural set in northern New South Wales. And it basically follows my protagonist, Kate Miles, who is a heavily pregnant detective in her last week of work before she goes on maternity leave. And so when we meet her, she's essentially in the middle of investigating an armed robbery at a fast food restaurant, and she's in the middle of that when she kind of gets diverted by her boss into reviewing doing an informal review of a case involving a death in floodwaters. So the town went through kind of summer floods, and there was a number of fatalities, and she's essentially asked to look at one of these cases again. And so really, from her boss's point of view, really all she's required to do is kind of tick a box, review the case file, write a quick report, end of that. But Kate doesn't really work that way. So the story kind of goes from there.
So how did this idea form? Floods, northern New South Wales, pregnant cop. How did this idea come into your brain?
I would say sort of two kind of things came together, I think, mainly, or maybe possibly even three things. So the idea of a flood was really I think the seed for that was very much the floods of the 2010-11 in northern New South Wales, Queensland, or southeast Queensland, which I don't know if you can remember, but the Brisbane River flooding, yes. Those sort of iconic images. And so I very clearly remember watching that on the news and going, oh, far out. And I guess just the power of those big rivers. I guess it hadn't really occurred to me till that point, just seeing sort of that extent of the flooding. Obviously since then there've been so many other floods, and we've seen that kind of quite regularly. But at the time, I remember those images really made an impression on me. And then some years after that, when I actually was thinking about writing, those are the images that I sort of came back to me, and I went, oh, wouldn't sort of a flood or a natural disaster be sort of a good setting, or a crime around that? Wouldn't that be sort of a good place to start? So that was the original idea per se. Kate really came about. I guess the next thing would be very much Kate as the main character. But so Kate very much came about because I guess at the time when I started writing, I was trying to process the exact same things that she is doing in the book, in the sense of that juggle between work life and small family. So when I started writing, I had young kids. They're 6 and 10 now, but obviously they were much younger then. My little one was just a year when I started writing. So I was very much in the throes of that full-on, overwhelming stage of parenting, and trying to juggle this career that I've built up over the years. I had built a successful career, and trying to manage both my own internal feelings of like, how many days should I stay with the kids, and how much should I give to work? Like those kind of things where you were kind of thinking about that, and the idea of a family unit, how both partners came together to kind of make it work for us, for our family. And so those were all the things I was processing at the time. So they kind of all went into Kate.
Yeah.
And it was much easier to process that in a fictional way. Where I had far more control over the pieces. So that's kind of, then Kate became that second key clog, I guess, that fit in. And when I started writing, I guess almost instinctively, that's what came out. It's all the stuff that I was processing. But
why police procedural?
Yeah, police procedural. So the police procedural side, again, was, I guess, the third cog was very much, I guess, my comfort read is crime fiction. So, and within crime fiction, my most comfort read is detective fiction. So those three elements, I think, again, when I started writing, there was almost sort of no, like my brain did not go anywhere else but crime. Like it literally just went straight there. Like it honestly never occurred to me to write anything else. The minute I started thinking about ideas, it was all about, okay, what's the twist? What's the mystery? What's the, how do you hide it? So those three things kind of came together. And then many drafts later, the Torrent. So yes.
That's so exciting. So just to give people some context, can you just give us a little bit of just a very brief career history to get you to this point?
Yeah, wow. Okay. So I think I put that first draft down in probably 2017. And that was very much...
No. Before that, to get you to before you started writing, what have you been doing in life before you started writing? And then we'll get into the writing.
Okay, sorry. Okay. All right. So basically I guess... Okay, so I came to Australia in 92. So I'm a migrant from Sri Lanka, did all my high school in Australia. I basically did the very linear thing. So school, immediately university, immediately sort of further studies, straight into worked my entire life, never stopped until maternity leave. So that's sort of my career. And I worked in the environmental sector, so in the public service, and then I moved to sort of the private sector into consultancy, but writing environmental impact assessment reports. So I did have that history of writing, but no, like
very different.
In the least bit to do with creative writing. So yes, so that's, I guess, a very brief history of work.
So what was the spark that made you think, I want to write fiction?
Yes. So I wouldn't so much say it's a spark.
Okay.
It was more sort of, it felt at the time a necessity. So I guess how I came to writing was very much in that throes of sort of early parenthood, where I felt life was just so overwhelming and everybody wanted a piece of me, and it felt like almost, and even when I was trying to do a good job, I guess, like I felt like I wasn't doing anything properly. When you're with your work, you're kind of thinking about the kids, or with your kids, you're thinking about work, and you're sort of never quite giving your full self to anything. And you had that real, it felt like, there was so much going on. And so I felt really that I had to carve out a space for myself. Like I felt like I needed something that just wasn't anything to do with mothering, anything to do with being a wife, being an employee, being everything else. Like I just needed something for myself. And so I guess for me, not being like a sports person or a music person, so I guess what I fell back on was my lifelong love of reading. And so I thought, I guess that's been a constant throughout my life. So I thought, okay, well, maybe that's something I could try. And as I mentioned, sort of, I'd obviously been writing in a capacity, not in fiction. So that's when I just started kind of putting ideas together. And
so you mean you did it by process of elimination, and you actually thought, I need a hobby and I'm going to narrow it down, and let's try writing. Am I hearing that right?
I don't think it was that specific at that time. I don't think it was like, okay, what will I do? It was more sort of in those times where it felt very overwhelming, and I needed to get out of, I guess, that my reality. I needed to go into a space where I felt like I had more control, and that fictional space was something where I did have more control, and the characters did what I asked them to do. Like go to sleep, and they went to sleep. No, but that. But,
murder someone. Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Wow, you're really distressing me. I should go and murder someone. Yes. I mean, look, I don't think I thought about it to sort of that extent, but sort of looking back, I can see that is what I was doing. But I mean, I remember having conversations with my husband about, like, I just need something like beyond all of this. It turns out that all of this, which is like all the stuff I really wanted, is still, it turns out it's about other people. And I just wanted to find something that's entirely for myself. So, that's the kind of the place I was at. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So what did you when you started writing, when you thought,
Yes.
I'm going to start, getting some of these thoughts out of my head, that first lot of writing, did that become the Torrent, or was there a lot of other stuff that you wrote before starting what then became the Torrent?
No, I kind of so very naively kind of jumped straight into writing a novel.
Amazing.
And I think that was because I literally wasn't part of a writing community, and I didn't kind of almost realize that you kind of had to write short stories or other things. Like I didn't have that, I guess, reference point or knowledge base to go, oh, actually what you should be doing is practicing on short stories. I didn't realize that. So I was just like, oh, okay, I want to write a novel. I could do that. Yes.
That's a big undertaking.
but I think the thing is, I don't think I came to it in that way. I mean, I didn't go, I will write a novel that will get published. I was sort of like, I will start writing to get away from this overwhelming sense of being not in control, like being sort of, so it wasn't sort of with the aim of getting a novel at the end. I mean, okay, or let's say it wasn't with the aim of getting published at the end, but I did have, I guess I made a bet with myself to go, okay, well, let's see if you can write a novel, because that felt like an actual goal or an aim that I could, okay, well, if I'm going to do it, let's see if I can get something out of it. So I mean, that's very me as well, because I'm so very goal oriented. So we're going to do something, there has to be like an end goal. So I guess it felt like, okay, well, if I'm going to start writing, if I'm going to actually dedicate time to this, and in that sense, it did feel like dedicating of time, because particularly that first draft, it was my husband sort of going, like, we went, okay, let's have Sunday as it was Sunday or Saturday, I can't remember, but as my writing day, and you look after the kids at that time. So it was an agreement. It was a family agreement, because I wanted to feel like, okay, the whole week I was, looking after the kids. I need that time. And so it was an agreement. So in having that agreement, I felt like I needed to have a goal. I needed to have we as a family needed to have an endpoint to this. Or you know what I'm trying to say. Like, then there had to be something at the end. So if I was going to ask my family to give me this time, then I felt that at the end of the 6 months or the 7 months or whatever, there had to be something there.
And was that the time frame that you and your husband agreed to, 6 or 7 months? And did you get to the end of your first draft?
Yeah, so I kind of I took the 12 months off for maternity leave, and then I took a little bit extra before I went back to work with my second child. So so in that time I didn't actually know it would take that long, but that's what it ended up taking. So I think it took about 7 months, I think, or 6.5 to 7 months to put that first draft down. And what I essentially did was I went, okay, every single week I am going to write a chapter. Didn't matter how long, how short, how whatever it was. Right. I would write it down, and it didn't matter if the next week I came back and literally rewrote the entire thing. I would put something down. And I think it was that space where sort of, I guess, that during the week your head's changing nappies and the whole bit, and then your head is in that, your unconscious mind is working. So when I came back to Saturday, it was absolutely ready to go. There was no writer's block, there was nothing. It was just bam, and it just came out, So it was this weird thing where my brain was clearly working on it in the background while I was doing all the stuff that you have to do, and then on that day I was able to kind of, it came out. Yeah.
And how many hours on the Saturday did you have an agreement that you could focus on this?
Well, yeah. Well, in theory, it was sort of like as long as it took, but it was, I mean, in the end, it just became like, if I got 3 hours, I'd do 3 hours. If I got 4, like, it was just whatever. I mean, in the end, my daughter, who was like incredibly clingy at that age, really, she didn't actually want to hang out with my husband. So in the end, what actually happened was she would like sit next to me on the couch or the bed while I had my laptop, and there'd be like the Wiggles blaring in the background, and I'll be still writing because I went, no, I still need to get something down today. And I can be quite sort of dogged like that. You know, I have that kind of personality where I'm like, okay, well, I've said I'm doing something, so I'm doing it. So it was like, I guess what it was it didn't mean that I didn't look after the kids on that day, but the focus of that day was not, okay, let's go out that day. Sure. Let's have a family thing that day. No, that was my writing day.
So would you say average to be 3 to 4 hours?
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah.
And so what I just want to clarify, because I do think some people would be really interested to know, is that did you give yourself 7 months to write your first draft? And that was your agreement with your husband that we're agreeing to 7 months, or was it open-ended? I want every Saturday and it'll take however long it will take to write a novel.
Well, so around October, I knew I was going to go back to work. So that was sort of where we had, I was going to go back to work sort of part-time, because my daughter would have been, I think, 2 at that point, and then we would have been able to put her in daycare. Didn't want to put her in daycare really young. So anyway, so that was, I guess, our thing of, so I had till kind of October-ish, but there was also a local festival, which Writers Unleashed, which I'm sort of, full disclosure, I'm now part of organising, but at the time I wasn't. But they have pitching sessions as part of the Writers Festival. And so that was on in August. So I went, that maybe I could do that. And so that was sort of like, I had that as a bit of a hard deadline for myself.
Great.
Not like I wasn't going to beat myself up if I didn't meet it, but it was something to aim for.
And did you pitch?
I did pitch, but I mean, now looking back, how embarrassing, because I was pitching my first draft, draft 0. I mean, how ridiculous. I mean, that just shows my level of naivety and lack of knowledge at the time. I literally did a first draft and I pitched that. I mean, that's just terrible. Anyway, so yes, I did pitch, but I mean, clearly it went nowhere. So then I started sort of actually looking out of my box, because I guess once you do it, you go, oh, I've actually, there isn't a sense of achievement with that. And you go, oh, okay, well, now what do I do with this thing? And your ego kind of pops up and goes, oh, maybe you could get it. That thing just does pop up. And so at that point I was sort of, I guess, again, as I said, I literally knew nothing about the industry. I didn't know writing centres existed. I had no idea. I didn't know #writing community existed. None of that. So my first step was actually getting a manuscript evaluation, because I literally went, okay, well, what do I do? And that felt like a first step. And that really, I mean, that just ripped it to shreds and went, and I went, thank you, because now I had somewhere to go with it, because I had no knowledge. So it was like, well, I had got to the end of my knowledge to that point, and someone else had to give it to me and go, well, this is why it's not working. Yeah. And you had, and particularly for a crime novel, well, I had done all the classic mistakes that now I hear about in all the podcasts. The actual story started at chapter 6, 5 chapters of backstory, and all of those kind of things, too many points of view, the pace just sagged, and all of that stuff that is all the mistakes. But in saying that, it was a first draft, so I had to now work on, and sort of took. So what was that? So another 3 years, was it? Yeah, another 3 years.
So this is a police procedural, and you also did our course, How to Write About Murder, at the Australian Writers' Centre, which basically takes you through every single stage of murder, from premeditation right through committing the crime to how it's investigated to what the police do and so on. Was that useful in writing a police procedural?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Candice, and that course is with Candice, with all
Candice
her
Fox.
information. She's amazing, Candice Fox, and she's just one of the most generous kind of authors in that writing community, and she gives her sort of knowledge so freely. Yeah, absolutely. That was really, really useful. And what I found most useful about it was all the resources, because it's not, she doesn't just say, okay, well, this is how you think about the suspect, this is how you think about, like sort of the investigative procedure. She doesn't just talk about that, but there's all these links. There's links when you want to think about sort of, if you're writing a story that's related to court cases, and how to look those things up, and how to look at procedural and legislative things, which is like sort of like, oh wow, this is like the blueprint of everything. And even if like it gives you a starting point, and then you can obviously go and investigate a little bit more, but yeah, no, I found that really useful, because it definitely provided that blueprint and just this massive list of resources that I could go to and sort of have in my back pocket if I needed to. Like with this particular book, I also heavily relied on a family friend who is a criminal barrister, and he's worked in the police force. Yes, I know. Yes, exactly. So it's really interesting, because at the time I was so sort of nervous, or like I didn't want to tell anyone that I was writing. So I was like, God, I can't show it to anyone. Like they just laugh at me. Like I just didn't want to do that. But once I had gotten over all of that, and I was finally ready to kind of share my work, he was a fantastic sort of resource for me, and he reviewed the entire manuscript, because as I said, he's worked in the police force, and now he's a criminal barrister, and he really kind of went through and went, well, and the offences and sort of the team structure and all of those like nitty-gritty stuff, which you can get through Google research, but those nitty-gritty, they kind of know that wouldn't really work in a regional kind of town,
great,
that kind of stuff. So yeah.
So then you decide, I'm going to enter the Banjo Prize. Oh my God. And what a good decision that was. So first, why did you decide to do that?
Okay, so the reason I decided to do that was basically because I had an Excel spreadsheet with all of the publishers and all of the things that any competition that they had, all their Friday pitches, and anything that had an opening. I just listed them out, and I went, okay, this is my year for pitching this novel, and I'm going to use all those opportunities. So my God. I just went, right, I'll just do that. So in my head, I was like, okay, well, they're going to reject that. Then I can go to Hachette, and then I can go to Alan and then I can go to, because I was just assuming that they're just going to reject it. But for me, I was like, well, a competition will get them to read it, right?
Yes.
Because a slush pile might sit there for years. But a competition, that's what they do. They read the work. They actually put away some time to look at those manuscripts. I went, okay, well, this is a way of someone from HarperCollins will read this thing. So that was my reasoning for it. And so it was literally on the basis that, okay, then I can tick that off and then move HarperCollins away, and I can move to the next person and then tick them off and then move to, that was what it was about.
You're very systematic.
No, but also in my head, it never occurred to me that they would take it, because in my head, this was my apprenticeship novel. So I wanted to give it the respect. I wanted to respect the process to make sure I did it, and didn't think in my head, oh, maybe I should have submitted it. So I didn't. So I wanted to give it its due and send it out. But at the same time, I was like, well, of course that's not going to work. So I just kept working on the second one. Like, it never occurred to me that was,
Oh my God. Okay. So first we get the news that you're shortlisted for the Banjo. And then we get the news that you've won the Banjo. I mean, what was that call like?
That was incredible. So, Valerie, I was very lucky because I got two calls, because I got a call in the shortlist, and then 2 weeks later I got the call for the actual win. But the shortlist was like, holy, like I can't, that was, to me, that was the win, because it felt like, okay, now I literally have something. So I guess for context, I have no other publications. I have no other wins. There was nothing in my so-called writing. It was literally, there's nothing there, right? not for the want of trying, but because by that time I was writing short stories, et cetera, but nothing was sticking. And so it was literally like, oh, finally someone said I'd done something that I could then put in like my pitch letter, which then hopefully someone will pick up. Someone will go, oh, she's been shortlisted, so I will read this thing. That is what I thought, that was the win. So I was like, yes, I've done it. Like, okay, now I can go forth and, have a chance. So it was this incredible, that I felt was the story of the phone call. But turns out it wasn't. It was another phone call coming. So yeah, so I mean, it's extraordinary. Like, it is that phone call memory that writers and authors talk about.
Go on, where were you? Where were you? Tell me, set the scene.
In my house. Boring. No, but okay. So the funny story is actually attached to the shortlisting win. So okay. the shortlisting. So that story was, that was a Friday. I remember it very clearly because my daughter is at home with me on a Friday, and she's done like a whole week of preschool, and so by Friday she's very tired, very grumpy, and she wants me absolutely to herself. So this phone call comes, and I'm like, totally, oh my God, this phone call. And I'm just like, so like happy, and I'm just totally focused on this phone call. And she's like, mummy, 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 mummy. And it just kept getting louder and louder and louder and louder. And I was trying to talk very professionally to this publisher at the other end of the phone call, and mummy, mummy, and it just getting louder and louder and louder. And then finally the publisher was like, oh, I think you've got something going on in the background. And I'm like, oh, yes, sorry about that. Anyway, and so she finally hung up, and then I was like, oh my God. And my daughter was like, she grabbed the phone off me, and she ran into her room, and she hid the phone.
Oh
she
my God.
So angry at me. And I was like, great, now I've been shortlisted, I can't tell anyone, so and then I made the mistake of, creeping into a room, getting the phone, and going into the bathroom and closing the door and making the phone call. But she heard me, because I told my husband, she heard me, and then I was even more trouble. So yes, so that's my
oh my God.
So yeah, it's funny.
Well, it's absolutely worth entering the competition then, right? I mean, so after that, I mean, it's now been public. You obviously went through some kind of editing process with the publishers. So what was that experience like? And was there a lot that they felt needed editing and changing?
Yeah, they sort of structurally, it was actually quite okay. They were really quite happy with it. In saying that, I read stuff and I'm going, oh God, this is horrible. And I rewrote an entire chapter. Like, I rewrote entire bits. I'm like, God, this sounds terrible. This is so, how can you like, anyway, yes. So because you're your own worst critic, but they really liked it. So structurally, there's a few bits and pieces. I think one of the conversations was about the fact that I guess it was so Australian in the sense that I do reference quite a few, I guess, Australian businesses, Big W, McDonald's,
right,
all this kind of stuff. And whether we should, because obviously you're, and I guess for context, I guess I'm not saying anything bad about these places. It's just purely to, I guess, locate you in Australia, and whether you are, I guess there's a discussion around whether we should just make it like department store, and so just have the generic wording versus sort of the I guess the place names.
Yeah.
So that was a conversation we had. And in the end, I think the majority of the team decided, like, we, because that was, I think, my copy editing comments, and or one of the comments from the copy edit. And we just, I guess, decided, no, it actually places it in Australia, and that gives you that sort of context. So that was sort of one thing we ended up keeping. The other thing was sort of, well, I don't know if this is a spoiler, but anyway.
No, don't say anything. Don't say anything that could be remotely a spoiler.
No. But I guess all I'm going to say is I did fight for the ending in that final chapter, because I guess my I think there was a conversation around maybe it should end the chapter before, and my very strong, that was something I absolutely fought for. But in saying that, I think like with anything, those comments are more about, have you seeded those ideas enough along the way, such that when you get to that endpoint and that chapter, it makes sense, right? And there's that linkages. And it was more that really what it was, because maybe it was in those first drafts, it was kind of like plonk there, and should it be there? But so it was more for me to work and seed that better across the manuscript, such that when you got to that end, you went, okay, that makes sense now.
So when you were writing it in your 7 months, or that first draft anyway, did you know what was going to happen? Did you plot? Because you've talked about your Excel spreadsheet and you seem a bit organised. Did you, plot out on an Excel spreadsheet or similar what was going to happen to your characters and the story and stuff like that, or did you just write?
No, I just wrote. So okay, so I have this weird personality where I'm like super organized with certain things, and certain things I'm like super kind of free about. Okay. So with the story type, okay, so in terms of the story, I absolutely knew that ending. So I knew that was, so that came to me very quickly, that was the ending, and I just needed to find a part to it. And I guess I knew that there will be 2 major plot lines, and there will be a linkage at a certain point. And so I kind of had that again in my head. I mean, I didn't know how it was going to link. I didn't know the 2 plot lines, but I started off going, I think it would be good to have these 2 kind of interweaving plots, and sort of you start off like one chapter on one major plot case, and then the next chapter kind of relates to the second plot, like, and sort of that interweaving sort of chapters, not as sort of specific as that, because it's a bit more freer in the book, but in general you're kind of going from one plot point to the other. So yeah, so I had those things fairly early, but I took a while to kind of work that how those 2 things intersected, and that, there was so I have this other document called alternative chapters. God knows, like it's about 100,000 pages. It's huge, because you just constantly, I write something, I go, oh, well, that's not going to work, but I don't want to get rid of it, so I just copy it and just type it straight in there, so that it still lives in my computer, and I never actually lost anything. But
it's good psychologically to keep it, even if you might never use it. In fact, you probably never will, but it's good psychologically to keep it.
Absolutely. And it makes you feel like, okay, and particularly when you get feedback and you go, well, that's not working. It might be a nice piece of writing, but it's literally not moving the story forward. And I am writing commercial fiction, so that is the point of commercial fiction. It needs to move the story forward, and each chapter needs to kind of fight for its place in that novel. So
when you were pitching it through your Excel spreadsheet, all the things on your Excel spreadsheet, you thought, okay, this might be my apprentice novel. I'm going to get busy writing my second one. So have you written your second one? Is it crime? And when's that coming out?
Yes, I was very lucky. So just as you said, in my head, I honestly, the way I was thinking of it was the second one, maybe they'll like the second one, and then they'll ask me what else I have in the cupboard, and then I can pull out the first one, because I honestly thought this was going to be my apprenticeship novel. So yes, so I pretty much started writing the second one in 2019, I think. I'm really bad with dates and stuff. That's all right. I knew these kind of questions were going to come up, and I'm like, God, when did I start to write this thing? Anyway, so and it is the sequel to Kate's story. Right. And I was very lucky that while we were doing the editing for this one, I managed to finish the second one before the print deadline for the second one, for the first one, rather, for the Torrent. And so then they accepted that second one, and they managed to put a little sneak peek at the back of the Torrent, which is amazing. And so the second Taken will be coming out in 2023. So same time, 2023.
Next year, right?
Yeah,
fantastic.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So obviously you finished. Does that mean you're writing your third?
Yes.
Oh my God. And is this like a trilogy?
Yeah, so that's going to be the next, so it's basically another Kate story. So,
Brilliant.
So I'll be doing that. So that's very much blank page. But yeah, so I'm hoping, I mean, there's been a lot, obviously the publicity and the release, it's been quite full on in terms of sort of all the things you got to do. So I think I have a storyline and I've kind of jotted a whole bunch of notes and I've written my first chapter. Woohoo!
Wow, well done.
Sort of to keep sort of trudging on with that. And then there'll be obviously the edits for Taken.
Yes, the second one.
Yes.
So have you gone back to your day job?
Yes. So what happened was basically as particularly with the Torrent, as things were sort of heating up, or whatever the word is, ramping up is the word I was trying to look for. I decided to, and work was very good about this, to go into into a contract-based work. So I've always had a permanent position my entire life. So that was like a really big deal for me to go into informal work, which, which would mean sort of, I guess, an insecure financial, sort of income. But I guess for me, it was better for my mental health because it just became too hard to try and manage it. I mean, I was working part-time. I mean, I wasn't working full-time. I guess the way I write is I do take a long time. It's not like I don't write really quick. So for me, I was getting...
Hang on, a novel in 7 months isn't that long.
Yeah, but that's the first draft. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, it does take a long time. And so...
And you only wrote 3 to 4 hours every Saturday.
Yeah. There were days that it would have been longer. It wasn't exactly, I didn't keep a sort of like a alarm clock next to me. But sorry, I've lost track of what I was going to say. But it felt like, so it was a kind of a big decision for me to kind of go into sort of contract work. So essentially now I'm in a sort of like a contract position. So when I have time, I go to them and I say, okay, now I've got time. Do you have work? And they are basically, so I take on a lot of their technical reviews and I can review and I'll go, okay, I'm dedicating 2 weeks to you guys. And then I'll just do only that. And I don't write during that period. And then, so we kind of work it out that way. So they kind of keep me in their back pocket.
Yes.
And when I have time, I'm able to. So I'm very, very incredibly lucky both to have an employer who will do that for me, as well as being in a financial position that we can do that for our family. So very lucky.
That's brilliant because sometimes you need a break from your manuscript and not look at it for 2 weeks or a month.
Absolutely.
Just to come back to it with fresh eyes. And what a great opportunity you can do this contracting. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, this is very, very exciting. You've got your career, your authorial career, kind of just waiting to happen. It's all going to roll out, starting with the Torrent. Let's end with, what are your top 3 tips for people who want to, be in your position one day?
Look, I think looking back at what has worked, I think for me, really, it was writing what you want to read. And I think that happened very instinctively, but I just love that genre. And I think when you read in that genre quite a bit, I think you kind of absorb things you don't even realize you're absorbing, and suddenly, even when you're starting to write, as a complete novice like I was, I didn't have the craft behind me. And yet I still kind of instinctively knew, okay, well, there had to be a twist and there had to, you kind of instinctively know what you're trying to achieve. You may not get it right first go, but I think, for me, that absolutely rang true, that I wrote what I wanted to read, and that has rung true for me. And I think the other thing is, particularly if you're writing in commercial fiction, I would say that idea of every chapter having to work for its place in the novel, the writing, I think, I'm saying this through experience because I literally had to cut all that backstory out. But it is that idea of like, where do you start your novel? And also, where do you start each chapter? And Candace also talks about this, how I think she talks about, can't remember if it's the first 50 pages that she talks about. In that first 50 pages or first 20 pages, whatever that is, you know, the reader needs to know where you're at, who your main character is, what their context is, and then what the problem is. The reader needs to know that all in those first few pages. So if you don't know that by that point, then you're probably, like, you need to fix that if you're writing commercial fiction like that, because that is that, you know, sort of the requirement from that genre. And I would say, so the third thing is probably, I guess, managing your expectations and anxieties. So I guess I would definitely say that, you know, writing a book doesn't mean all your anxieties and your imposter syndromes disappears. They're all still there. Every single one of those things is still there. And
so how do you manage them? How did you manage them?
Well, I think managing them is actually by talking about them and and having a support network around you and doing those things like sleeping and, you know, exercising and all those things that are terrible, but you actually have to do them, because it's like that does help with the, you know, like, you're having this, you know, anxiety period, and you go for a walk, and that literally physically gets rid of those chemicals from your body. So it's, I know that sounds really naff, but
no, it's reality.
It is reality. And unfortunately, you know, you think like, oh, having a book or having publishers say, having that affirmation will fix all your anxieties. And it doesn't. It literally does not. It just stays there. And if you let it, it will grow, because it's still in your head, and you have to find a way of managing that beyond the external, and it can't come from the external. And I think, and that, like, I know I sound like a self-help book, but you have to find that way inside yourself somehow, because unfortunately that stuff doesn't go away. So yeah.
I love it. Great practical advice. Congratulations on the Torrent. This is so exciting, and so thrilled for you. And thank you so much for your time today, Dinuka.
Oh, thank you so much, Valerie. I've been listening to this podcast for so long, so just to kind of be on it, it's kind of, and me giving the advice, it feels wrong. But thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate it. Thank you.